What's up, everybody? This is Music Matisse. This is the In Studio Podcast. As usual, every single episode, I'm joined by my right hand, my Cody, my brother.
First fam chill in the building.
That's right. Salute to you, sir. Appreciate you. We almost coming down to the end of season 1 here, man.
Yeah, in the books.
Yeah.
In the books.
Crazy, but thankful, to God for everything. Thankful for your participation, your dedication, your hard work, because it definitely couldn't be done without you.
Now,
That's for sure.
Now I gotta extended gratitude to you, man. I can't take that without saying you're a big part of this. So.
Nah, man, I appreciate it. Definitely appreciate it.
Right.
Our guest today, I've been waiting. I've been debating. Nah, there's never no debate. Just been waiting for a long time to secure this one. I've known this man for 11 years, and he has not stopped working. He's not stopped grinding. He's not stopped hustling since the day I met him. If there's anybody that I know, honestly, that should have their life and their history in this game turned into a real movie, is this gentleman here. Engineer, CEO, label owner, rapper, you name it, he does it. Producer, the whole 9 yards. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for our guest today on In Studio, the incomparable Jake Palumbo.
Woo, that's an intro, man. I appreciate that.
Absolutely, man.
It's a hell of an intro, man. Thank you.
How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing good, man. Like, all things considered, I've had a pretty good apocalypse this year, man. Like, in the middle of, COVID-19 basically shutting down the music business,
Yeah.
I've still managed to have a fruitful and productive year so far.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's really not slowed. I've had to move much differently and much more cautiously, but, it really hasn't slowed things down. I mean, outside of shows getting canceled and, things like that, like, I've still been able to stay very busy in the midst of all this. So, no, I'm doing great, man. I'm glad to be here.
Understood, brother. Understood. We're definitely glad to have you here. As you said, the world as we know it has totally changed in the past 7 to 8 months.
On fire.
Literally, that's what it seems
Literally.
like, and it's unfortunate because we're maybe 25, 26 days away from our presidential election. And I'm really waiting to see what is going to happen the day after.
I'm terrified, to be honest.
Understood, man. Understood. I pretty much know after, us being colleagues, friends, brothers, the whole nine for the past 11 years, your story to a greater degree than our listeners. But start at the very beginning for people who may not have heard of you, where your story as far as music and the culture of hip hop, where did it begin for Jake Palumbo?
Oh, it is really difficult to kind of sum up, a 15 plus year saga into a few sentences, but I'm Jake Palumbo. People might know me for a lot of different reasons. They might know me as an artist and an MC. They might know me as a producer. They might know me for my day job, for lack of a better term, which is a mix recording and mastering engineer for a lot of your favorite artists. They might know me for the record label, Space Lab Recordings. They might know me for things like my video blog, How to Be Rich When You're Not Famous, where I try to give, advice and insight to artists, who are like me and have no resources. And, so in some ways I've kind of become a part-time educator too. But with that said, I was born and raised in Tennessee, in East Tennessee. And, geographically, I was very disconnected from hip hop and from where it was, birthed and developing.
Mm-hmm.
But my entire life, I always had an obsession with music. Growing up where I lived, especially, being a kid in the 90s and, we didn't have the internet yet and there was not very much to occupy yourself with. If you didn't find something to occupy your time with, you were going to get in trouble pretty quickly. So, I come from a somewhat musical family. Like, my dad and brother are both great guitar players. And, my mom had a huge record collection and, I was just kind of immersed in music, and that was the way I kept myself occupied and out of trouble. So I started playing instruments as a kid. And, you know, I had garage bands with my classmates and different stuff like that. But, you know, by the time I became a teenager, I started getting very, very intrigued by hip hop, you know, starting with things like Public Enemy and the Wu-Tang Clan and, you know, that whole great era of hip hop. You know, I became very intrigued with it, and I have an obsessive personality. Like anytime anytime I'm into something, I cannot stop until I've learned every micro detail of how it works behind the scenes. So, you know, in Johnson City, Tennessee, I began, you know, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, well, I kind of know how to play a bunch of different instruments. And, you know, I went out and bought a drum machine, and I'm like, being in hip hop gives me the capacity to kind of be a one-man band in a way. And so, you know, I started very crudely producing beats and rap songs in my bedroom. You know, in 2003, I lost my father. And as kind of a knee-jerk reaction to that at the time, I quit my job at Sears and was like, you know what? I'm gonna sell my CDs out the trunk and, you know, try and make some money doing this music thing. And by this point, like, I had begun really teaching myself about the music business and studying it. And at that time, you would read all these books, you know, that would always tell you that it's very important to establish notoriety in your hometown and your region first before you kind of try and venture out in the world. And today with social media, like, that statement is true. Like, you know, you can be in Topeka, Kansas, and, you know, have a record take off if you market it to the right audience. But trying to pursue hip hop, especially the kind of style of hip hop I was doing in Johnson City, Tennessee, you know, circa 2005 or 2006, like, that was a very easy way to starve to death. So, you know, I got pretty destitute pretty quick. And I've always been the kind of person, if you follow like the trajectory of my career, my whole career has been me jumping into something that I'm completely not equipped for yet, treading water long enough to not drown, and then figuring out a way to make it work while I'm not drowning. So, you know, at this time, like, I've just always been the kind of person that, like, I benefit from being thrown into the deep end of the pool and having to fend for myself. So with about $75 to my name in 2006, I moved to New York City. And, you know, I crashed on the couch of a girl that I knew up here until I found a job in an apartment and so on. So, you know, I'm 25 years old by this point, and I'm sitting here trying to figure it out. Like, I'm still making beats, I'm still rapping, this entire time, you know, I had never had any kind of delusions, really, that, you know, a record label, specifically a major label, was ever going to reach out and sign me. For a variety of reasons. I didn't think that they would really be interested in my sound. I didn't think that I would be willing to agree to a lot of the terms that are in a lot of those contracts. And to me, like, pursuing a deal, like, I don't have any stories of, like, being turned down for deals and stuff like that, really, because I never pursued them. You know, the distribution deal I eventually signed years later with Soul Spasm came after a decade of just not pursuing anything. And that's just a joint venture distribution deal. Like, so with that said, the entire time I'm pressing up my own music as Space Lab Recordings, you know, making records with my friends and you know, trying to basically establish a camp, a label, a sound, a brand identity and all that. Now, where I began to tie it all together was as a producer. I realized that, like, I needed to be able to make my own music sound better. Right. So I needed to learn the fundamentals of audio engineering and mixing and, you know, how to make my own stuff sound better. So I kind of stumbled across the realization in the midst of that, well, you know, if I learned how to do this and got good enough at it, I could actually pay my bills and do this. Right. So Because it's a thing. It's not like college where you can work your way through it. Like they want all their money up front, and I didn't have it. So
Right.
the idea dawned on me that when you graduate audio school, they call it job placement, but it's actually internship placement.
Mm-hmm.
You get put on as an intern at a studio, and it's up to you to parlay that into some type of employment. So I'm like, what would happen if I just skipped that step and got an internship? You know, I already know some stuff. I just need to really be in the mix and learn from some people that are already doing it. So
Right.
I got an internship at a recording studio. I was the oldest intern there. You know, I'm 25, 26. You know, most of the other interns are in high school. And, you know, I was just an assistant. I tried to make myself as useful as I possibly could so that they would want to keep me around and want to teach me stuff. I interned for free for a year and a half. And then, you know, I'm a firm believer in signs, and I don't tend to sleep on them.
Mm-hmm.
So in the same week in 2008, it was November 2008, in the same week, my day job closed and laid me off. I was a bookkeeper at a digital camera, a website that sold high-end digital cameras. I was like a bookkeeper for them. Mm-hmm. And so they closed and laid me off at the same week that one of the engineers at the studio quit. And they had sessions that needed to be filled. And they're like, well, Jake, you know, do you want to do it? So I got my first paid recording session. I'm like, oh, okay, cool, smooth landing, not so fast. That studio went out of business in December. Mm-hmm. So at the top of 2009, I wandered into a place called Play Studios where I worked at for a few years. And to speed the story up a bit, you know, I just put my nose to the grind and tried to learn everything I possibly could. I didn't know what I was doing half the time. I'm quick at figuring it out along the way. And when you literally depend on, people ask me like, well, how did you learn Pro Tools? How did you learn how to do this? How did you learn how to do that? And I'm like, I needed to eat. Like if this client did not leave the studio satisfied, he's not going to pay the money at the end, and I'm not going to go home with anything. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you find that in those situations, you know, you learn pretty quick. So I spent the next like several years using kind of a ping pong system where, you know, I did my job as an engineer the best I could. And eventually, you know, my clientele starts getting better and I start working with bigger names. And mm-hmm. the thing is it's a much easier sell. You know, and I'm just using him as a random example because he's my big bro. But like if I'm in the studio with Sadat X and I do his session and I do a good job and I'm cool and I'm fast and all that, like, at the end of the session, it's a much easier sell to be like, well, hey, can I play you some of my beats? Or, you know, what would it take to get you on a song? Or, you know, these conversations, not telling people that I'm a rapper has been one of the best things for my career as a rapper. Like by just establishing myself as a cool, smart, dependable guy that gets the job done, I find that when I do eventually fire that shot and pitch the music, like my batting average is much better. Like, and again, right. You know, I'm using him as an example because he's a friend and colleague, but like, you know, I worked with Tony Touch for over a year before I even told him I did music.
Right.
And, you know, by this point, we built up a relationship and a rapport and a good working, you know, everything. And, you know, my record's on Shade 45 next month. You know what I mean? Not to say that, you know, people will do things just because, but by building that relationship, when people are able to help you, you find that they generally will.
Right.
So way late in the game, like after I had, by this point, I quit Play Studios after a few years and went into business for myself. I've completely been my own boss since 2012. You know, running Space Lab Recordings, the recording studio extension of the label. We were in Manhattan for a long time, but we've been in Brooklyn for the last 3 years. You know, so I paid the bills running the studio as an engineer. used that to parlay that into building my relationships in the industry to where I get to then produce and collaborate with a lot of, artists that I look up to and are fans of, and, in some cases even get to do projects with. And, it was, as I titled my fourth album, Jake It Till You Make It, I was well over 30 before I started really reaping the fruits of my labor and making money at this, and, having fans. And, I've always had, and I'm sure we'll get into this later in the program, like I always have had a devoted small fan base, and we're big proponents of, having a small group of true fans over a bunch of, fair weather fans.
Right,
But regardless, being able to really grow my audience into something a little more tangible, didn't happen until much later in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I'd given up when I turned 30, like I would have missed out on just about all the good stuff.
Right.
We'll get into some of that later, but I didn't mean to talk your ear off and go on a monologue, but basically I've just used one hand to wash the other.
Right.
And because I'm able to do a bunch of different things, that allows me to work with people in a bunch of different capacities. Mm-hmm. So by having a variety of hustles, I'm still here and still in business when a lot of people who were much better funded or better connected than I was are gone. Right. So it's the tortoise and the hare, man. Like it's the little engine that could.
I think that, the success you're having now, as you said, in the past few years, even having success after 30, look at the time you put in. You put the work in. And I think that's the issue with a lot of artists and producers and people in this business today. They want to come in, and because social media has us thinking that we can send a text in 2 minutes,
right,
or an email in 2 minutes, that's how your career is supposed to be. Well, my neighborhood is saying I'm hot. My mom told me I was hot. My boys are telling me that I can, I'm the best producer they've heard. I'm the best engineer they've heard. And it's not the case. In your situation, it was always about the work. I saw that firsthand myself. It wasn't like I got it through secondhand information. Now, technically, I want to ask you this question. In regards to a lot of new artists today that are just coming into the game, and this is what I find out, even being in this position with Solar, you can have artists that are brilliantly talented, but they not only do not know the business, they don't know the technical side.
Right.
I can have an artist that I have a conversation with, and they say, well, I want to submit something through SMG. I want to submit something to your label. And I'll ask a simple question. Is it professionally mixed and mastered as per industry standard? And they won't be able to tell me what that is.
Right.
You wearing your engineer's hat, do you find that that's the same when you deal with different clients in that capacity that want you to engineer their projects? They have no idea what you're talking about?
Yeah. And, I have a particular style when I get with an artist where, I'm making a point to kind of try to read what their knowledge level is and make sure that I'm explaining everything in a concise way that makes sense. Like as I'm doing what I'm doing, explaining the why of what I'm doing.
Right.
But, we do get, this has happened. It's not even with just up and coming artists. Like I've gotten, now that home recording is, as popular as it is, and, you can buy a laptop and a microphone and record vocals at home. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong at all with recording vocals at home. You just need to make sure that the acoustic space that you're recording in is good, because, I get vocals sent to me from, I'm not going to out anybody, but
right.
I get for big artists, notable artists that, they bought Pro Tools and they're saving money by recording at home. And, you can hear the room reflection in that. So to answer your question, it is very important. If a record is not pleasing to listen to,
mm-hmm.
It is pretty much has its wings clipped. It's very limited in how far it can go if it's not pleasing to listen to.
Right.
And some records you can get away with at lower volumes, but when you crank it up, You know, if the mix is not good, if it's not mastered properly, you know, if it's recorded poorly, you know, when you play it loud, that's going to tell the truth. So,
Right.
you know, and again, I'm not saying you have to go into a big studio and spend a fortune. You don't. Like, you can record good vocals at home. You just need to make sure that, you know, the space you're recording in is isolated and you're getting all of your voice and none of the room. And then you need to make sure that whoever's doing the mix on it, you know, is tending to it, you know,
Right.
because they can love a record, but, you know, if when they play it in the club, it sounds screeching, you know, it's going to pretty much stop it dead in its tracks. So, you know, you do have to remember that, you know, what we're making is supposed to be professional level. So, you know,
Right. Can you, for those who may not know, can you give just like a brief definition of what consists of a master recording, a record that's mixed and mastered as per the industry level, like the things to look for? Because I'm sure we're going to have some new producers, new artists, you know, people logging on eventually over time. And I think that definition, coming from an experienced engineer, someone who's actually worked with some of the best,
right.
It would mean a lot for them to hear it from you, and it will probably get through quicker than, for instance, hearing it from the CEO of their label. But
Right.
that's another story. Go ahead, sir.
I would say by far the most common error that gets sent to me in recordings is when it's clipping. And what I mean by that is one of two things. Either the vocals are recorded too hot, you know, the gain on the microphone is too high, and, you know, the waves are too tall, and they're peaking, as they call it. You know what I mean? You know, when you look at your wave on the computer, your peak should not be going through the top. If it is, it's too loud. So I get a lot of vocals that are recorded too hot. I get a lot of songs that are mixed by somebody else that are sent to me for mastering, that the mix is bounced too hot and it's clipping. You know, if you're sending something off to a mastering engineer, you want to try and leave a little bit of headroom. And what I mean by that is going on your master fader and pulling that down, you know, minus 2 dB or minus 3 dB. Or every song's going to vary depending on how the song is. But you want to make sure that, you know, you're leaving some headroom for them to work in. The thing to remember is that it needs to be clean before anything else. We can always make it dirty. You know, it's like when you go to the barber, they say, you know, I can always take more off, but, you know, I can't put it back once we cut your hair.
Right.
So, you know, we can always create ambiance, and we can always crank up the gain on the compressor. We can add distortion. We can add, you know, all these things. You know, it's mainly important at the recording stage and at the mixing stage to make sure that everything is clean and has headroom. You know, so that's probably the most common thing that comes to me is things that are recorded too loud or mixes that are printed too hot. Like, you know, your final volume can always be achieved in mastering. At the mixing stage, do your best to make sure everything sounds as clean as possible. So, that's definitely one of the most common things.
Gotcha. Take notes, please. Take notes. Take notes. Those of you who are listening.
Yeah.
You mentioned I mentioned in your intro as well, you being a CEO of an indie label. The name of your label is Space Lab Recordings.
Yep.
How many indie projects has Space Lab released up to this point, and how long has the company been in existence?
Well, technically, Space Lab Recordings was founded in my bedroom back in Johnson City, Tennessee. So, I mean, that's going back to like 2004. Now, we didn't actually become a company on paper until 2006 or 7. I incorporated in 2016. We became a corporation in 2016. But, you know, it began initially just as a means to release my own music. Like I said, you know, I never really thought major labels would be after me, so I instead wanted to be a successful indie. So, you know, it began just me pressing up my own music and taking on that responsibility for myself. But as time goes on, you know, I make friends with other artists, and, I'm a producer. I have an abundance of beats. I can only rap on but so many of them. And it was really easy for me to pick 12 or 15 beats off to the side and go do a project for somebody. So between Jake Palumbo projects, between group projects, I've done with some of my peers and colleagues, and between, one-off projects that I've produced for other artists, I want to say, I may have to go back and fact check this, but between albums, EPs, mixtapes, and singles, I think we've released 52 titles since 2004.
52.
52. Now, again, only maybe 8 of those are Jake Palumbo albums. Like I said, a lot of them were records I produced for other people, or, a couple of us would pair off and do a group project or something like that. But, and then I've done one-offs like with Rusty Jukes, the Jake and the Jukes Man album, and I did the Iron World album with Rock Mecca and stuff like that. But yeah, 52 titles over 14, 15 years,
Okay. Now, during the course of this conversation, you've mentioned people that you've worked with. We had Sadat X, you mentioned Tony Touch, you just mentioned Rock Mecca and Rusty Jukes. Tell us basically, as far as records you've produced or collaborated on as an MC, the lineup of artists that you've collaborated with so far.
I'm so bad at this question. I did a radio interview about 2 weeks ago, and I made a joke that I need to make a cheat sheet to keep in my pocket because I'm so bad at this question. And again, being that I do a lot of different things, worked with might mean a lot of different things. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I mixed a record last week that had Nas on it. I've never met Nas. You know what I mean? So it can vary whether it's in the capacity of being a producer, being an engineer, or being on a song with y'all. But let me try and go down the list here. Rest in peace, Sean Price, Royce the 5'9", Rock Marciano, Shabam Sadiq, the Beat Nuts, pretty much everybody in the Boot Camp Clique. I engineered Rock Nest Monster's solo album. I've got a few songs with Smith & Wesson. Like I said, me and Rusty Jukes got a whole album. Who am I forgetting? The Beat Miners I work with on a regular basis. Oh, Lord. Cool G Rap, KRS-One, MOP. Lord, I know I'm still forgetting a bunch of people.
That's a lot, though.
Uncle Murder, Sky Zoo, El the Sensei. Me and El the Sensei from the Artifacts actually have an entire album coming, and I just finished mixing. The Artifacts are putting out their first album in about 18 years actually, and it's entirely produced by Buck Wild for Digging in the Crates, and I just literally just finished mixing that last week. A lot of people, man. I like I said, I need to officially compile a list because I know I forgot a bunch of people.
So with that lineup, the unique thing about it is definitely hip hop artists that you have worked with. It's definitely MCs, no doubt. And it's amazing that you basically working solo. You also act as your own management to a large degree. You handle all of your business to a large degree. How did that even come about with that many stellar artists? Because those are artists who may not be mainstream, but they're legendary underground because of the fact that they still release product to this day. Most of them have been in the business 15 to 20 years or more. They still tour internationally prior to COVID, not just here in the States, but also throughout Europe, throughout Asia, throughout Australia. So how did you end up with such a diverse line of stars that are now in your resume?
There's no one story. Like literally everything on my resume happened as a result of a relationship that I had with somebody else. Now, just again, throwing out random examples, like Tony Touch is one of my regulars. The Beatnuts produced a bunch of songs on the Peacemaker 3. As a result of that, Psycho Les comes to me to get his solo album mastered. You know, I work with El Da Sensei from the Artifacts a lot. He does an entire album with Sadat X. I end up getting cool with Sadat. You know, I'm working with my man Innocent. He brings Rock Marciano through the lab. Like, you know, Rusty Jukes comes to lay a feature for somebody else. We end up hitting it off and talking. Like, and this is why I always say that, like, your relationships are literally everything, because you hear the term, like, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I used to misinterpret what that actually means. For years, I mistakenly thought that it means that, like, you know, you grind it out and one day you meet somebody that changes everything. That's not, for 99% of us, that's not what it means. For 99% of us, what it means is that the larger the Rolodex of relationships that you have, the more likely opportunities are going to come your way. Now, you know, because you think about it, like, virtually everything that happens in this business happens as a result of a referral. One person is hired to do a job. When they have to call in other people, they think in their Rolodex, well, who do I know that I can trust with this job not to mess it up? So, you know, like, for example, with the record, you know, I mixed a record last week for a new movie that just premiered on Netflix on Friday, the 40-year-old version. And there's a song in the movie called The Mecca by Nas, Dave East, Remy Ma, Styles P, and Ghostface Killah. And it's produced by the Beatminers. Now, neither Netflix nor the production company know who Jake Palumbo is. Right. You know, they're not going to, but shout out to our homie Guy Rute, who's a legend in the music business, done a ton of different things. Guy was hired as a music supervisor on this movie. Right. It's his responsibility to reach out producers to find beats for the soundtrack. He has a relationship with the Beatminers. The Beatminers beat ends up getting picked, and that's what the artist records to. When it's time to mix the song and they say, hey, Beatminers, we need to get this song mixed. Oh, well, Jake's our guy. He mixed the Black Moon album. You know, that so I say that to say, like, that entire circle is just people who are like, oh, we need this. Let me call someone I trust. So the more people that you have established yourself with as being somebody I can trust with the job, the more likely opportunities are going to swing around and catch you. Right. Again, like I said, neither Netflix or nobody at the top of that puzzle know who I am. But people that I do know and have rapport with get hired, and that inevitably, and again, that's just one example, but literally everybody that I've done work with has pretty much came. Now, occasionally, and I guess it's been happening a little bit more as of late, I have a bar in a song that I says, my only marketing plan is my reputation preceding me. So, you know, I am starting to get more jobs as of late by people that have just heard the work and, you know, liked it and want to reach out and get it done. Right. But, you know, in the years that it takes for that to happen, I had a career in the meantime just through a network of solid relationships with people. And as people would get hired to do things, if what I do made sense for that project, you know, they felt confident reaching out to me. Now, it's up to me at that point to deliver, you know, and make sure you run, you know, throw a touchdown. But, you know, every artist I've pretty much worked with has been a result of some other work I've done. So like you said just a moment ago, you know, it's about the work. You know what I mean? You got to do the work first.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing. Now, has the Mecca been, as far as roster talent and artists, has it been the heaviest record you've actually mixed as far as that lineup? Because I mean, everybody you mentioned is
it's a big lineup.
It's platinum, and Dave East is, I mean, he's the new kid on the block in a sense, but he's already walking down a legendary road. You're talking Remy Ma, you're talking Ghostface Killer, Styles P, and Nas. Those four right there, each one of them, whether they were part of a group, like in the case of Ghostface, they've had 20 plus years in the business of nothing but success.
It's definitely one of the heaviest lineups. What's the greatest kind of just depends on your personal taste.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, because I can tell, I've had situations where, people ask me who I work with and I'll throw out a name and they're like, who's that? Whereas if I say that same name to somebody else, they're like, what?
Yep.
Whereas like, I mentioned to somebody, I worked with Young M.A. back in the day before she had a deal. And, the kids are like, what? And I'm like, at the time, man, it was just Tuesday. Like, I was just like, I was trying to get my session done so I can get something to eat and, pay my phone bill or whatever I was going to do. So, it's all subjective to who you like and what you listen to. But,
You think this single will probably be, and let me know if I'm wrong, but you think this single will probably lead to you actually receiving a plaque?
Who knows? I mean, we'll see. I hope the record does well regardless because it's a dope record.
It is.
Because the movie's dope, because the Beat Miners are my big bros and some of the greatest producers of all time. I'd love to see the record do well, man. But I can never, it's so funny because a lot of times the things that we project are going to be huge, might not be. And then the things that we might not have high expectations for might, catch fire. So I just try to do the best that I can each time and put it out there to the universe. But no, I definitely hope the record does well. And I hope the movie does well. Yeah,
the movie I happened to see when it debuted Friday night. I think you'll be okay.
Word, man.
And it looks, the write-ups I've seen on the single online, everything's been favorable. It's just, the different critics and the reviewers and everyone is just like, the movie's good. So far it looks like it's going to be critically acclaimed, and the singles received nothing but good write-ups over the past 3 days.
Seems like it.
Yeah. So I think you all will be okay. I hope that one does go gold for you, or even platinum for you, sir.
I'd love it.
Nice to put that on the wall.
Yeah, I was gonna say it'd be nice.
It'd be nice to put it on the wall. You damn sure have earned it. Let me ask you this. Now, you mentioned Johnson City, Tennessee. What was that culture shock like when you came here at that particular time that you spoke of? Was that your first time in New York?
Not at all, actually. I started coming to New York. I think I made my first trip to New York in 2002. Just to come up here, go to Fat Beats, pass out my demo and, rap at open mics, like at the New Eurekan and all that. Because one thing from the get-go, like I have never from the, I've told the story in an interview recently about, how I used to drive 2 hours up the mountain to go rap at the open mic at the Mexican restaurant in North Carolina just to have a mic to rock. You know what I mean? So like from the very get-go, I've never had a problem with jumping in the car, the plane, the bus, the train, whatever it is, to go somewhere to try to spread the word. And being that, like, especially at the time, what I was trying to do in Johnson City was largely falling on very deaf ears. Because you remember at that time too, we were just about like 2 years away from MySpace. And, so like the whole social media marketing thing for artists really wasn't invented yet. Like you were still having to go out and pass out flyers and, accost strangers at the mall and ask them if they listen to hip hop and like, all that stuff that was no fun. So with that said, I started coming to New York in 2002. I think I made my first trip. And again, I'm a young man, just fresh out of high school back then. In 2004, a girl that I knew from Johnson City got a job teaching high school in East New York, in Brooklyn. So because of that, I had a place to stay when I came to New York. So from 2002 till I eventually moved here in 06, I probably made that drive 20 or 30 times. So with that said, like, you know, I was kind of accustomed to New York at that point. And I'm a guy that, like, I'm very frantic and not frantic in that, like, you know, I'm a ball of energy, but like, I don't like to waste time. Like, I cannot stand to be idle. Like, even when I'm relaxing, I'm like, yes, I'm relaxing. Self-care. Look at all, you know, everything I do at any moment of the day, I got to be doing something. So New York, the pace of New York fit me a lot better than the pace in Tennessee.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it wasn't that much of a culture shock. Like, you know, there were things that were different that I had to get used to, but I had the luxury of having been able to come up here a lot and try before I buy, in a way, in a sense. So, you know, it wasn't that bad.
No, that's a good thing. Now, we're going to wrap up shortly, but I want to touch on something, and it's unique to what's going on today. You have had independent success. You've been self-supporting. You've established everything on your own. You carved your career out of granite. When you see an artist on the level of Kanye West, who recently, you know, spoke out openly, didn't hold anything back in regards to his, you know, deal with Universal. He put his contracts online. Knowing what you went through and how you have had to build over the past, you know, years of your career, what do you think about a person that's in his position who's complaining about monies received, advances taken, but he's still financially very secure? You, from your perspective, do you feel that that's still justifiable, or from everything you've walked through and have gone through and built, you look at it as just something you dismiss and like, okay, that's just an artist that's letting off steam or venting?
I think everybody has, you know, everybody's got the right to be, you know, to have their feathers ruffled about whatever ruffles their feathers. But, you know, my only take on the Kanye situation was, like, those contracts were signed, I want to say, in like 2014.
Right.
And by that point, you know, not only did you have over a decade in the industry, at a high level of the industry, you know, that's not even counting the years paying dues and Ghost production and all that. Like, you know, you had been on for over a decade. Kanye had the leverage at that point to either, if he wanted, see, the thing with being independent is not everybody is built to shoulder the responsibility.
Right.
You know, just like not everybody should be an entrepreneur. Like, some people, you know, some things we need employees for. You know what I mean? And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that not everybody is cut out to be a CEO and to shoulder that responsibility. So maybe being a label head or whatever was not for him. But at that point, if you didn't want to say, you know what, I'm passing on this deal, I'm offended by it, I'm turning it down, I'm going to go over here, get distribution, and forget this. If you didn't want to make the jump to that responsibility, like, you had the leverage at that point to hold out for a better contract. You know what I mean? And at the end of the day, you can afford good lawyers, and you still proceeded forward and signed it. So at that point, I don't really fault the label for being evil, because you voluntarily agreed to that deal at that point. Like, and again, you know, you can complain about anything you want to complain about. Like, we have that right, you know, as humans. But, you know, at that point, if you could have held out for a better deal. So, you know, it's not my situation to comment on, but, you know, I don't feel sorry for him, really. You know what I mean? In terms of that, like, you know, I know being independent, even when you're well funded, being independent is difficult. You know, because you don't get do-overs. If you do something and you make a mistake, then, you know, then you take that loss. But, you know, he could have probably held out for something better, I think. So.
Right. Okay. So we've talked about origin. We've talked about what you've built as far as the label. We've talked about the amazing artists that you've worked with. We talked about the recent single from the movie 40-Year-Old Version on Netflix. And that's Nas, that's Remy Ma, that's Ghostface, that's Styles P, and Dave East. What's next for Jake Palumbo?
Trying to get out a bunch of these projects that I've got kind of building up in the queue. As it stands right now, I do have some projects that are out now that you can go check out. My most recent solo album, The 100,000 Air Hobo, is still available on Space Lab / Soul Spasm. We had videos for $50 haircut, for Rubberneckers, and a couple of things off that. Earlier this year, when quarantine first began, I put out an instrumental album called Transient Ischemic Attack. So that's available now. Now, in the meantime, I have a Jake Palumbo solo album getting ready. I'm almost done with it. I've still got a few songs left I need to finish, but we released the first single last week. And it's a double feature music video. It's actually 2 songs in one music video. The A side is called Country Boy City Kid, and the B side is called Exit Stage Left. So that's going to be the first single off Plant-Based Libtard, which is going to be my new solo project. I know my titles are bugged out. Now, as a producer, I have an album with El Da Sensei from the Artifacts that's coming. That's been in the works for a few years. We've just been so busy with other projects that, it's just held it up for a little while. That's finally getting ready to come out. That album's called Solving Cases. I have an album with Lex the Hexmaster, who's part of Twisted's Magic Ninja Entertainment. A lot of people who are fans of the Juggalo world are familiar with Lex the Hexmaster.
Yes.
Lex the Hexmaster, he's most known in the Juggalo world, but, he's a spitter from Queens. And, he appeared on my last solo project on a song called Violent Stupidity. We have a video for that out now also. But we're trying to kind of bridge that gap a little bit, because the Juggalo world is some of the most supportive fans in the independent music world.
Yes, they are.
And to try and bridge some of that gap between the quote unquote boom bap hip hop and that world, like, we're really looking forward. I'm excited about that album. So me and Lex the Hexmaster got an album coming. Me and Q Unique from the Arsonists and Stillwell just started working on a project together. As an engineer, I'm mixing the Beatminer's new album, Stifled Creativity, which has got an all-star guest list. I just finished mixing the Artifacts and Buck Wild new album. I'm always working on something. Like I said, whether I'm rapping, whether I'm on the beat, or whether I'm behind the boards, I'm always working on something. Like, for this to keep going, I got to keep pedaling the bicycle. So I pedal the bike every day, man.
Okay. All right. One last question. Would you recommend to anyone that's just coming into the business as a producer, engineer, or an artist to take that independent self-travel road that you've taken?
It's hard for me to answer because, like, it's for some people and it's not for everybody. Like, I made a video on my Instagram last week. There's 2 different chambers of the brain. Mm-hmm. There's a creative chamber of the brain and there's a business chamber of the brain. And very few people do both of those chambers exist in equal strengths.
Right.
And even in the very few people that do, it's hard for them to coexist at the same time. And that's what I was saying in the video I posted the other day. Like, the qualities that make me a dope artist and a creative producer are the qualities that make me take 5 days to return a phone call.
Right.
Or, that make me a socially awkward recluse. You know what I mean? Like, and the side of my brain that makes me a good businessman and a good people person and a good salesman and good at networking and all that, for me to be good at that, I have to turn the artistic side of my brain off.
Right.
And that's what makes it take longer in between projects. You know what I mean? So with that said, you have to look within yourself, because like some people can do both. Some people are really good at the creative side and not good at the business side. Some people are vice versa. You know what I mean? Like, you know, what's the saying? If all the sailors want to be soldiers, then who's manning the boat? Like, you know what I mean? So in some artist case, it is better to have somebody else handle the business. You have to make sure that that's a person that you can trust, because having inept or bad management is worse than having no management.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So, but with that said, because I know we got to wrap up in a minute, but with that said, nobody is going to get a record deal today based on their talent.
Right.
The people who do get a record deal will get a record deal based on the moves that they were able to make on their own. So whether you're ultimately pursuing your end goal as being independent, or your end goal is to get signed to a better label, you know, or a label that's got juice and a label that knows what they're doing, you should still be making some sort of moves on your own.
Right.
Because, you know, that's the path either way. Because, you know, for you to get a deal means a label has to see what you're doing on your own and want to come and buy in.
Right.
So I would encourage you to at least try it. And if you get to a point to where you're like, you know what, I'm doing fine on my own and there's no reason to let somebody else come in here and potentially mess things up, then stick with independent. If you get to a situation where you're overwhelmed and you know, you're not able to get back to people quick enough, and you know, you're too busy to make sure if you get to where I'm at now, basically, you know, then you might want to consider bringing in somebody else to you know, to help guide you, you know. But ultimately, everything I ever learned in the music business was learned through trial and error. So I encourage every artist to get out there and make some mistakes.
Right.
Because that's going to teach you better than anything. Do it, try it, fail, learn, repeat.
Gotcha.
And be patient.
Gotcha. So. Well, on that note, we're going to close this down for now. I'm sure we're going to talk to you in the future. We're expecting what you've already started to continue greatness. You always got a platform here, as you know. I'm always
appreciate it, man. Yo, honestly, you really are, man. I will say this, man. Mr. Matisse believed in me over a decade ago when not that many people did, and when I did not have as much to show for my efforts as I do now. So I appreciate that. I will do your show anytime, man.
We appreciate you, man. Keep rising to the top, as Dougie Fresh said, and don't quit. I know you won't. I'm expecting more and more and more and more and more. You know, just successful things, and love, peace and love to you and your family.
Same to you,
definitely
man.
Keep you and everyone else in our prayers, man. And we're here if you need us, brother.
Likewise, man. I appreciate it.
All right. Continued success, Jake. Appreciate
you
coming on.